Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Elitist Jerks. I wanted this to be something where I could just kind of rant about games, different aspects of playing video games, things I've learned over the years, just funny stories, perspective, and things like that. So, this first episode, I'm going to be talking about communities. Usually in a video game, they're more for like MMOs, but they can really be about any video game. Communities in the sense of what are normally called clans, guilds. New World calls them companies. I think Eve calls them corporations. Most of the time, I'm going to refer to communities. It's really interchangeable with one of these other terms used for the in-game, like social hub. So I wanted to talk about them in the sense of what I think makes them fail, and if you kind of inverse that, you can get an idea of how to be successful, or at least what I think if you worked on and achieved, then you'd at least give yourself the best chance of succeeding. But while we're on that topic, MMOs, this is again mostly for them. I can see that maybe in some games like, I don't know, StarCraft 2, you'd have clans, or Diablo 3, you'd kind of have clans, and loosely people would kind of use them as a social hub to gain partners in playing the game. But most of the time, what I'm familiar with at least, is in the setting of MMOs. And a lot of the times, these communities are very reflective of the goals and agendas, the way that the game is organized, and that's kind of reflected back on what these communities are formed around. Like a guild in New World might be incentivized to gather around warring or pushing influence, as in some lesser degrees, or to some degree maybe even like PvE, to do invasions or to do expeditions. In Black Desert Online, you'd have guilds formed around node wars and sieges. Maybe to a more casual, again, a lesser degree, you'd have some that were life-skilling guilds, where players would loosely band together and talk shop about how to the latest, changes in how they might affect your life skilling. For a short time, there was sea monster hunting guilds in BDO, because that was a feature that could actually have a purpose for a guild functioning around and kind of organizing payouts and methods and stuff like that. World of Warcraft, you see communities built around maybe a casual environment where it's just a guild with a fun name and a cool group of people, moms and dads or kids all playing at a casual pace. And then you get some more very serious raiding guilds where they're trying to be, this term that goes around, semi-hardcore, where they want to get into the hardest tiers of content, and so guilds are formed around that. Mobile games, there's unfortunately or fortunately, there are mobile MMOs. You're going to see players that get together around whatever features mobile games have to offer. A lot of the times, mobile MMOs also have a pretty ugly side where pay to win is part of the game, and so to a degree, you get guilds that build their structures or their hierarchy around, the most geared, progressed players who tend to be the biggest spenders. And there's definitely pressure to if you want to achieve higher ranks or status within your community, to spend more, things like that. So I'm mentioning all this because you can start to kind of see this idea where whatever the game is about tends to be how these communities come together. I want to talk more about our next section, which is, again, what I mentioned earlier, what I think causes them to potentially fail in my experience. And again, if you kind of flip that 180 degrees, you'll kind of see what I think is important to work on as a member or a leader in these communities. I want to go ahead and explain a little bit about myself. My name is John. Some people know me as Evensin. And why might you care what I think, or what are my credentials on all of this? Besides your typical, hey, I've been playing games for 20 years, or whatever that might be, or however that sounds to you. Well, I've led some pretty competitive guilds, clans, communities in my recent past, and for quite some time now. In Black Desert Online for about year and a half, 2 years, I learned Vertex. I'd like to think it was one of the more prosperous times for that guild. Most recently, I led Black Wolves in a New World. We remained fairly competitive from the very beginning of its launch to just about maybe a month ago. I kind of didn't see much of a reason to continue playing New World. I wish all the best for it, but I definitely lost personal interest. Funny enough, recently people are excited for this next release, but I don't see too many of its fundamental aspects changing enough to warrant me coming back, at least for the foreseeable future. Previous to all of that, I've also just naturally been elevated in whatever guilds or clans I join in whatever games I play. I think in large part because it's my nature to kind of see issues and want them to be solved. I also happen to just have that free time to play video games, and it does take time and effort to want to solve issues in your community. I've also been a little bit of a natural leader, if I do say so myself, where I don't mind picking up kind of that main tank, raid caller, shot caller role. I don't think I'm the best, but it's something that I think I do at least adequately, and anytime there's somebody I think that's better, I'm so glad to hand it off. It's not necessarily a natural desire for me to want to be, the main spotlight kind of guy. I wanted to make this section about what I've gained in experience and kind of share that with you guys about the shortcomings of communities, guilds, clans, corporations, you name it, whatever you guys call these things in the various games. I'm just going to go over a couple of aspects and then those aspects in more details. So the first one, leadership. It's typically what causes a community to fail, obviously is the very top person, and it usually is manifested in one very clear way. When a community starts to fail is the absence of leadership. A lot of the times, based on the game or the situation, leadership can be really active. Obviously, they're there for a reason. They got selected or created everything and a following because they were passionate or because they were trustworthy. But life happens. Time passes on. What may be, these people fall out of having the time for whatever reason for the community or the game. And them being absent definitely hurts the situation. People feel it. They see the leader not present, or they see that they're distracted, and that definitely hurts the community. Something that I've seen personally is that if the leadership is going to be absent, in my opinion, they should set up a situation where they're going to be succeeded by somebody else, a successor, or that there's somebody else who is clearly holding the reins in their absence. Because what I would expect is that we're not going to always have the same amount of time and effort, or maybe there's going to be a more demanding time, big changes in a video game or for this community, and you'll definitely need to delegate more. So again, it kind of leadership absence, but also the lack of vision to see that there was going to be a need in their absence, that you don't understand your community and how much your presence weighs in on the health of the community. Kind of tied in with leadership in all aspects of leadership, but also something that's pertinent to its members is the next point here with, again, what causes communities to fail, and that is the ego. This is something that I personally put a lot of weight into, where I think it's just important for everybody to be aware. I think it's just a healthy concept to understand as a person, and then also when it comes to video games, the ego gets in the way a lot of the times in an unhealthy way, unfortunately. It can be good. People should be proud of their accomplishments. They should definitely, we're all here to kind of enjoy something, and to truly enjoy something, you kind of have to have a little bit of an ego. But there is, again, for the purposes of the community, there's unhealthy aspects of the ego, and that's what I'm focusing on. What hurts the community when we're talking about the ego? It's mainly aspects where a person is placed into leadership and they're doing what they do because they're trying to feed their ego. Either they need the recognition, they need to be seen, they have their own agenda that outweighs the benefit or the agenda or objectives that will benefit the community. That's the things that I'm looking at that would hurt the community. That's a little circular logic there, but what I mean to say is that if people don't understand that they have an ego, I think that's one of the things that is really dangerous. It is a situation where it can be really beneficial to have pride or ego, right? I guess I'm a little strange in that I'm very proud, and my ego and my identity is in kind of creating a fun, functioning community in these different games I play, whether it was Black Desert Online, or New World, or World of Warcraft. Whatever I touch, I have a really good time seeing other people have a good time. So in a way, that's natural and healthy. Some other leaders, and I've met them and I've seen them, they have a passion and a drive to succeed. But the reason they're doing it, kind of the why they're doing it, their motivation, is to see themselves succeed, is to see their own agenda kind of pushed. They might have, like, hey, I want to go ahead and lead this company in New World so that I can get the followers on Twitch or Instagram or whatever, or YouTube. If those are your reasons for doing it, it's not exactly wrong, but if those things put your community second, then you're gonna reach some point where you're gonna have to choose, like, do I put time and effort into my community, or do I put time and effort into my YouTube channel or Twitch or whatever? And there you can see very clearly where it's like, okay, well, the reason why you're the leader is because it gives you an important role in the hierarchy in our organization, but you're not putting the organization as a priority. Therefore, it is, in a way, very clearly costing your community. Through my experience in time, I've seen egos that are almost healthy, or at least something you have to recognize as a player. Gamers, guys, gals, we want to be seen. We want to top the leaderboards. And to a degree, as a leader, you kind of have to see that you can placate some of these people. I have a very particular example where in BDO, I had a extremely great player. He would come at our beckoning to show up for whatever sieges, sometimes even node wars, mostly sieges. And he was a great, reasonable person. Anytime I needed him to merc in or join in to go siege, he was there. If I needed him to go help somebody else, because I was part of this larger alliance working not with just my own guild, but other guilds. If we needed to bolster a side, he'd go sign up. Great player, top performer. Very, he kind of had that alpha, Chad, whatever you want to call it, persona when in comms and stuff. And everything he did and said was fairly reasonable. But at one day, his ego kind of flared up, and this is in a weird way too. He had a friend that was part of the guild. We'll just call the friend Bob. And we'll call the Chad gamer Chad. Okay, that's the easiest way to put it. So Chad loves to pick a fight with Bob, and we're just talking about like memes, at each other's expenses and stuff. And it kind of spills over. They have like their own Discord, but it spills over to our Discord, the Vertex Guild's Discord, and Bob comes to me explaining like, hey, I'm getting kind of internet bullied or whatever. So it comes to my attention. I look into it, and it's just nonsensical, bullying. I mean, these are two people who are, to everybody else, are just friends, and it just seems to be like the kind of boyish back and forth bickering. Well, I tell Chad, hey, look, man, I respect you a lot. You're a great guy, great player. I can't thank you enough for all the things you've done for us, because he was with us, at our lows and at our highs. And I asked him, hey, for me, would you just stop doing what you're doing and I'll give you your perms back? I kind of missed that part, but I had revoked his perms in the Discord so he couldn't keep kind of bullying him in some way. So he said, okay, yeah, I understand, Evensin, sure. Give him his perms back. I give Chad his perms back. And immediately Chad goes to some public channel in the Discord and, go ahead and at Bob. Hey, Bob, you needed Evensin to come protect you. How frail are you? And I see it pretty much immediately. And I'm like, oh, I just, he's egging this guy on immediately. So I take his perms away, this time for good. And this is where I have maybe a shortcoming, where to me, now it was like, hey, now he's disrespecting me a little bit. I've asked him, as understandably and reasonably as a mature adult, to just like, hey, whatever you guys got going, keep it out of here. Let's be friends. You guys are friends. But now I almost feel like, hey, it's insulting to me, because he clearly isn't listening. And so I approach him like, what are you doing? We just talked about this, and you're egging him on again. And he doesn't really defend himself. He just accepts his punishment. And so that was it. That costed me a player. So you can see in one aspect of that story that my personal ego kind of costed me a player. Now, I think I'm wise enough and smart enough that I pick my own battles, and at that point, like I said, this guy had been with us, our highs and our lows, where I was just like, you know what? That was disrespectful, and that I just wouldn't tolerate it. That was my right, my prerogative, that I was just gonna allow that to, like, okay, he's gonna fall away, or maybe we hash this out. But right now, I don't feel like placating him. But you can see what I'm talking about. That there are, as a leader at least, you should recognize that dealing with the community at large, you're gonna run into this situation where people feel like they have to be recognized. They want their egos to be fluffed here and there. They want to feel important. And this is a challenge for a leader. You're going to see sometimes that you're going to have to bend and weave and fluff some people's egos sometimes. And maybe you're going to be like me and at some point also say, hey, look, enough's enough. Like, Bob was also a good player. So I was almost in a situation where I would have lost Chad or Bob, and I chose to lose Chad because he was being a dick, I guess. But yeah, that's a long story to simply explain that you're going to deal with this in some aspects, and it should be something you're aware of, and that it hurts communities if you let it run rampant. You have to reasonably control it or be aware that it exists. Another point, and this is not really actually in the frame of reference of what causes communities to fail, but the next point is psychopathy. I actually think it's healthy for your leaders in a community to have a degree of psychopathy, but it's not what you think. Now, I had to look up just to be sure what exactly, because there's definitely like what's sociopaths and what's a psychopath. So I wanted to look up what psychopathy is. This is the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Mental disorder, especially when marked by egocentric, antisocial activity and a lack of remorse for one's action, a absence of empathy for others, and often criminal tendencies. Now, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I think what more I'm kind of trying to get at is there's a good movie reference I have here where Spock, in the latest, I guess, version of Star Trek, is that called Enterprise? Where Spock is willing to sacrifice himself in the second movie, and he gets kind of in this like little tiff with his girlfriend, and they're having an argument. You guys know of that scene? Well, what happens, if you're not familiar with it, what happens is that Spock they're on this planet at the very beginning of, I think, the second movie, and Spock is willing to let himself die. They have a mission, and they wanted to save the planet. There was like a volcano that was going to erupt, and there was a malfunction with the equipment, I guess. They weren't going to be able to beam or save Spock. He wasn't going to be able to get back in the ship or something. So he was willing to let himself die to save the planet. Instead, what happens is Captain Kirk orders the shuttle to get Spock, and they kind of jeopardize their mission because they have a policy as the Star Trek, spacefaring, I forgot what they're called, but the spacefaring branch, they're military. They're not supposed to meddle or be seen by these like undeveloped worlds. Well, they get seen, right? Because Kirk decides, break policy, save Spock. Well, that leads to an argument later on where the girlfriend of Spock is upset with him. That to her it was done out of lack of care for their relationship, what it would have done to her, Spock dying and all, what it would have meant to her. And that it was part of Spock's kind of Vulcan culture and trait that he's cold and calculative. To everybody else, the Vulcans, they land somewhere on that psychopathy spectrum. So Spock explains, though, that having had witnessed his entire planet's demise, that he actually had incredible empathy. He had already felt something like that. He felt it also when he had mind melded with the commander that had died in the previous scenes leading up to this moment in the movie. And that she mistook that him not caring about his death meant that he didn't care for those around him, but that he actually, in reality, has such control over his feelings. He chose not to feel like that he was willing to sacrifice himself, and what otherwise looked like a logical, cold, calculative way of handling your emotions is that he's already felt loneliness and his entire people's demise and all the things with and existential crises and all that. He was just pushing that feeling out. He in other words, was in control or mastered his emotions. That's what I mean when I talk about the level of psychopathy, or whatever you want to call that. You want to see that in your leaders, in people that you promote in a community, that kind of lead and are the role models of community. You want people who are in control of their emotions to the degree where they're going to be willing, nobody's dying for gaming community, I think, but you need them to be able to be cold and calculative, because they may be dealing with everyday decisions that affect other people's emotions, and they can't be hung up on it. You want them to care. It's not the lack of caring. It is that they understand that things need to be done, decisions need to be made. Somebody's going to go to the war in New World, somebody's going to get a roster slot in World of Warcraft, somebody, some kind of alliance or something is going to be formed in BDO, somebody's got to be the enemy in Albion, somebody's corporation's got to, be reaped or taken out to expand your sectors in EVE, or whatever game there is. Decisions have to be made. That's part of the game, and they affect people's feelings, but you can't, as a leader, let that eat at you. You have to be able to control and master that way of handling your own emotions. They cannot be a struggle in the way that you behave and go about, because every single day, or at least, depending on how active these games are, on a weekly basis or some monthly basis, on a regular occasion, you're going to be dealing with these situations that do affect people's lives in the way that they feel, and you can't be everybody's friend. And you have to be able to control your own emotions in such a way that they're not an additional obstacle. One last thing that I think that it's pretty important that leads to communities falling apart is poor identity. I see this pretty often. So poor identity. Oftentimes, I think I can kind of see why communities, guilds, clans kind of sell themselves as these PvX kind of situations. They're just throwing a really wide net, and they want to capture as many interests as they possibly can, members, and they'll just kind of filter them out later on, right? But they want to get you in the door. I can see that as maybe being the reason why they sell themselves as like, hey, we do everything. But the truth is that they're probably that if you're gonna do everything, first of all, that automatically makes you a very casual guild. There's no way that you could do everything in a game as a community and not have some shortcomings somewhere, right? You don't have the finite amount of time and resources to do everything well. So eventually people are going to leave that situation because they will find like, hey, I want to PvE more, I want to PvP more, I want to gather more, I want to see Monster Hunter more, I want to do something else that a PvX community can't offer me to that degree. But people do this kind of salesmanship of getting people in because, like I said, they want to cast a wide net and get them in there. Problem is, I also see it kind of backfiring, and I've seen this before, where people recruit for their communities in this sense, but then once you're actually in, you see that that's not honest, that they're not a casual community, for example, that they are actually pushing an agenda. I have a personal experience with a guild in Black Desert Online, for example. They were a gaming community, but it was called Tenacious. Really great, friendly people. They were a gaming community first, and BDO took kind of second priority to that, in the sense that if somebody from the community, at the larger group of friends that played games together, if they wanted a slot in the guild, they'd get it, whether they were into the node war, the attendance requirements, or whatever, because they were a member of the community at large, they'd get it. And at the same time, the leader of the BDO side of this community was trying to push us to get into more hardcore node wars. At the time, tier 1 node wars in BDO didn't have any special rule set to it. It just was the less competitive node wars, the beginner node wars, and that T2 paid out more, and that was the only difference, that the people who wanted a bigger payout, and they were minuscule, but that naturally, because of the increased incentive, the stronger guilds went to T2s, and I don't know if there were T3s and 4s as well, but most of the newbier guys were in T1s. And so they had this agenda of pushing to T2 at some point. Well, I saw there was like kind of a exclusiveness or something contradictory going on. On one hand, you're filling up our limited 100 guild slots. There was no merking at this time. You're filling up our 100 guild slots with, by definition, casual players. They weren't maybe even logging in daily or grinding or getting geared or participating in Node Wars, let alone. But they took up guild slots. On the other hand, you're recruiting and you're selling this message that like we're pushing for higher tier competition. There is compromise. You could totally do those two things, but you could feel the internal pressure for players to excel. Now, me myself, at least at this time, I was one of the stronger players, mostly probably because of my gear. I had plenty of time to grind and play the game, so I kind of was on the forefront of like strength as a member of the guild, and I kind of saw like if I was being realistic, 90% of the guild was like not pulling their weight compared to me. And then yet people like me were being told to like basically do better, do more. It just doesn't seem right, right? There was this dissonance going on where we were not in harmony. It was you're pushing the players that do show up for Node Wars to do more, and you're also still looking at your community, and there's a situation where you're bringing in weaker members as far as a performance, being able to perform in Node Wars, let's say. So this is an identity crisis. I see this very common in video game communities where they just don't know what to call themselves. They're not even aware that this is a thing as a video game. It's super important, I think, to know what you are, know what you're not. Because it also leads to the understanding what makes you different than any other guild, any other clan. What makes you you? Why are you you? Why your guild and not another one? And if you have no concept of that, this is going to be a problem. Funny enough, I have almost an objective admission that we used to do these Siege podcasts in BDO after like our sieges on Saturday, and Tenacious at some point, I think while I was leading Vertex, ended up on the Siege podcast. They had done a fight in Serendia, which is one of the territories back then that you could fight for. It was just like one of two maybe of the sieges they ever did, and I was kind of almost like proud to see them in Siege, the stepping stones. And I had made this comment, I had kind of brought up this issue, and they admitted right there and then, yeah, like, haha, yeah, we're still having that identity issue. We're not sure if we want to be a Siege guild. The gaming community kind of keeps us back, right? I don't know if those were the words, but that was the impression I got, where they were still, this was years after I had left them, that they still had this identity issue. And so that is something I think is really, really important for people to realize. Identity. So we've covered many reasons why I think things can kind of fall apart. Important aspects that if you focus on might help you succeed. You might ask, why would anyone care to put all this effort into trying to have a successful community? I think the more rewarding aspect of gaming these days, at least for me, is the community. I've heard so many times over and over that the community is the reason why people continue to play games. Sometimes games they no longer truly enjoy, but it becomes enjoyable enough because of the friends and relationships they've made. Now that's usually looking at a situation that's deteriorating and the glass half full. But that to me says that all along the community was something that made something sweeter, better. Speaking of relationships, that's another reason why. I've seen lifelong friends develop, networks of people created that support each other in more tangible ways. Gamers that have become husband and wife. Gamers that have cheated on each other with a new interest. Yeah, it goes every which way. That is all to say that the gaming has become more tangible in our lives, just like people at work might feel like they see each other more than their own family, and in a way have a new family. Folks that pour their time and passion to gaming have made truly impactful friends in their hobbies. The time we spend gaming becomes all the sweeter with all the drama, support, rivalries, and everything in between that we find in life otherwise. And it's those experiences and relationships that make us all grow. I can't think of a better reason to do your best to understand and succeed in creating or being a part of a lasting community than the fact that it just makes the hobby you're enjoying all the more real to you. Social circles formed at work, church, politics, they all have financial or other incentives to gather people. A gaming community is more like a club. It probably doesn't have any financial backing or income, but it still needs good leadership and passionate people to withstand the test of time. Well, that's all I have for this particular topic today. If you guys enjoyed this, please let us know in the comments or hit the like button, subscribe, all the usual YouTube jazz. I am really curious of what you guys think of this kind of perspective. I think future episodes I'd like to cover things like RMTing in video games, something close to some of my acquaintances and friends. Getting banned has become a lot easier, and if you are a particularly passionate player, you can get in a lot of hot water there. If you guys think these or other topics are great for another episode, please let me know. Your input is really going to help and shape what we do here, so thank you.